Good morning, everybody. This is a live severe weather update as we have a lot to discuss. Mainly, this is going to be a recap of the Hurricane Delta dual intercept starting off in Cancun, then another intercept in southern Louisiana. We collected subsonic data at both locations, and we're going to compare that data between two different life cycles of Hurricane Delta. As it was approaching Cancun, it was a very different storm than as it was approaching southern Louisiana. As it was approaching southern Louisiana, it was interacting with an upper trough that was approaching from the west, and that excited some enhanced gravity wave action that we were able to measure inside the column of the eye. And that is as that wind that was funneling through the buildings was not able to saturate that signal, and we could actually measure clean data of those gravity waves oscillating within the column of the eye. But it was a very different storm than as it was approaching Cancun. Out in the western Caribbean, it was a record-breaking storm, the fastest intensification from tropical depression up to Category 4 hurricane, even faster than Hurricane Wilma back in 2005. Hurricane Wilma had about a 2 nautical mile wide eye and strengthened into a powerful Category 5 storm, actually one of the most powerful tropical cyclones ever to happen in the tropical Atlantic basin. Hurricane Delta didn't intensify to that level, but it did reach about 145 maximum sustained winds, 145 miles an hour. It had about a 4 nautical mile wide eye, so very similar to Hurricane Wilma. It also had a compact inner core, and that compact inner core also allowed it to put on the brakes equally as fast on approach to the northern Yucatan, making landfall just to the south of Cancun. And one difference that we noted between the subsonic data of that storm that was approaching Cancun as Hurricane Delta and the data that we collected in Hurricane Sally in the Gulf Coast was that those tornado-like whirls in the very front eye wall were not nearly as dramatic inside Hurricane Delta as a slightly weakening or even steady state storm that still made landfall as a Category 2 storm just to the south of Cancun. We dropped down to Cancun and actually intercepted both of these storms. You can see both of the videos. I'm playing both of those. Cancun is in the bottom part of the screen just below me, and then you can see the video from Lake Arthur, Louisiana in the upper left. And our goal during this intercept was simply to intercept this storm twice at two different life cycles at very different latitudes as well, and see how that subsonic data compared within this storm and also between the other storms that we sampled. Hurricane Laura in August, also Hurricane Sally. Very sadly, we experienced the dark side that these storms are leaving behind throughout the Gulf Coast, especially in southern Louisiana. That was impacted by both Hurricane Laura and Hurricane Delta, and you can actually see the total destruction from Hurricane Laura and then the damage of Hurricane Delta superimposed on top of that in locations like Creole. And I'm going to show you the drone footage a little bit later, showing that perspective of those two storms on top of each other. And they have a long road of recovery to go. And in fact, there's hardly any evidence of that recovery from Hurricane Laura that happened in August. And it is just heartbreaking to see what southern Louisiana and other locations of the central Gulf Coast are going through. But I'm also going to give a recap here of the satellite imagery, satellite loops from Radar Omega. We'll show you the different life cycles on satellite. We'll compare that with the subsonic data. Here was that storm as it was approaching Cancun. We went to Cancun thinking this was going to be a Category 4 or 5 storm as it passed over the northern Yucatan. Thankfully for that region, it did weaken to a Category 2 storm. And look at that peculiar west to east convective band. And that actually signified the beginning of that weakening trend, a very interesting west to east band on the south side of the center that formed. And that was associated with a disorganizing inner core. And I think it encountered some unexpected shear on approach to the Yucatan before re-intensifying again as it entered into the Gulf of Mexico. But I'm going to show you the subsonic data that we collected in the front right eye wall of this storm as well. And I'm going to show you the subsonic data collected inside Delta down in Cancun, and also as it was making landfall fall in southern Louisiana. And here is the 3D loop here showing that storm on approach. This is after it reemerged. This is on the approach to the Yucatan right here, and this is when it was near peak intensity, reaching that Category 4 strength with 145 mile per hour winds on approach to the northern Yucatan, and then it came in with about 105 or 100 mile per hour sustained winds as a Category 2. Because of this made landfall at peak intensity, it would have been major problems, a major catastrophe across the northern Yucatan. It caused major problems anyway, with quite a bit of damage as a Category 2 storm, then re-intensified into a Category 3 storm as it moved over the Gulf of Mexico, making landfall as that classic half-a-cane, as we call it, more of a sheared storm. Here is the radar from the Radar Omega app showing all that convection on the north side of this system, making landfall very close to Creole, Louisiana. I saw a video of about an 8-foot storm surge down there in Creole, and we went down and found some water lines. And in the structures down there in Creole, you can actually see two different water lines. One that is near 20 feet from Hurricane Laura that came in, and really didn't leave anything left standing as it came through. A couple of the well-built structures were left standing, a couple of stilts, but really almost everything was wiped clean off of its foundation, leaving nothing in its wake. And then Hurricane Delta came in only 14 miles to the east of Hurricane Laura, brought in about an 8-foot storm surge on top of that damage, hindering recovery efforts that appeared to have barely gotten started down there in southern Louisiana. And it is just heartbreaking that this region continues to get these very dangerous, devastating landfalls with damage superimposed on top of each other. It's something that I've never seen in my lifetime, a hurricane season like this. You may remember the previous big-time hurricane seasons like 2017, 2005, and this one just blows that out of the water in terms of the total number of tropical cyclones or named storms that have made landfall in the U.S., with Delta being the 10th named storm, and that includes tropical storms and hurricanes. In terms of hurricanes, with 5 hurricanes making landfall, it's just shy of the record, with 6 coming ashore back in 2005. But as I mentioned, we're likely not done with hurricane season, as the GFS at least is showing another tropical cyclone that could be born out of the Caribbean and move off to the north and potentially impact portions of the southeastern U.S. But that is just, hopefully that doesn't happen, because if another storm in the Gulf of Mexico would just cause major problems, and in fact, any single hurricane anywhere causes major problems as well. But here is the INTERCEPT footage from Cancun, and as I mentioned, I'm also going to show the data that we collected in the city center of Cancun. We initially placed a subsonic sensor in the trunk of our rental car, and eventually we lost the bumper of this rental car as we were trying to flee some of those winds and get on the southern side of the strip of Cancun. Here are some of those police officers with an immediate response after the hurricane came through. Armies of police officers, federal workers hit the streets and were able to clear those trees out of the way. Definitely, Mexico is incredibly prepared for these hurricanes, the response, and out ahead of these hurricanes. They take the hurricanes very seriously, and it's very good to see such an efficient response out there down in Mexico from this hurricane. There you can see some of the damage that we observed there in Cancun just after that eye passed. But very different than when the storm came into southern Louisiana. This is a pretty compact storm, moving relatively fast, so those impacts didn't last incredibly long. The maximum wind gust recorded in Cancun city center was 106 miles an hour, and that was on the strip, and our subsonic data was collecting data in the city center, and I'm going to break down all the data that we collected inside both of these storms right now. But first, I want to show you Hurricane Delta, the new data set as it made landfall in southern Louisiana. We collected this data in the Lake Arthur area, and these are very fine scale pressure oscillations here. So this subsonic sensor is capable of measuring pressure oscillations on the order of 16 times a second. And that very high resolution, very sensitive microphones allow us to capture data that more coarse resolution barometers are unable to resolve. And you also have the supporting spectral data showing the range, the frequency range that each of these pressure oscillations are able to encompass. And that way, by analyzing the spectral data, we're able to discriminate between those whirls that are caused simply by wind passing through the buildings at low levels and those tornado-like whirls that are actually coupled with the updraft and the convection. And one thing that you can see in this data set here, the most striking feature are these gravity waves measured inside the eye. And so looking at this data, you can see this these fine scale oscillations. That signifies wind as well as tornado-like vortices that are whipping by the subsonic sensor. We're able to analyze the spectral data to determine if these whips are coupled with convection and if they're a tornado-like vortex, or if they're a whirl that's caused by the wind passing over the friction of the earth or those buildings. But you can see right here, just after the pressure minimum of 973.8 millibars measured there, that the winds shut down. And just after that, we had a gradual pressure rise inside the eye, but you can see how smooth that pressure data is inside the eye, signifying that we were in dead calm inside that eye, and it was a little bit displaced from the pressure minimum measured at Lake Arthur, showing that we were likely in the east side of the eye, maybe not quite in that centroid, but the very calm winds of the eye allowed the subsonic sensor to really sample these gravity waves right here. And they have a known frequency as they were moving by, and this is definitely the most prolific gravity wave signature that we've seen inside of an eye with any hurricane so far this season with the subsonic sensor. And that's because this hurricane was interacting with an approaching trough from the west. So it was interacting with a jet stream at deep layers, and that interaction between the increasing mid and upper level winds, that approaching trough in the west, and this tropical cyclone, a very large system as well in the Gulf of Mexico, generated these gravity waves. And the gravity waves were present throughout the entire duration of the storm, but definitely evident inside the eye, where you get a reduction of the wind, and that allows the subsonic sensor to record this data without being oversaturated by other effects like the wind flowing over it. Maybe storm chasers parking next to the subsonic sensor can also register a signal in there. And another thing you can see from the subsonic sensor is this rise in temperature that corresponded with the dead calm of the eye. Even though that's internal temperature, it still recorded that rise in temperature, and that's classic inside the eye, where you get that sinking motion, increase in temperature, decrease in dew point inside the middle of the eye. Eventually, as we ramp up our science mission, we'll be launching live streaming weather balloons and rockets that we'll be shooting into the eye wall. But right now, we're measuring subsonic data. We also have our Surgeonator Probe. And right here is the makeshift Surgeonator that we built using parts at Lowe's. Basically, had to put on my plumber hat. The bottom here has a screen to prevent debris from going inside. This goes at ground level. The weight of the water, the storm surge comes around it, and the weight of the water forces the water up this tube. And we place a die just in the top of this so it'll leave a watermark as well. But this is a very makeshift design, and there's actually an electronic version that Mark is about to design. I would have had that in time for Hurricane Delta, but we decided to bust it down to Mexico to get the dual INTERCEPT, and then we had to use this proof of concept for the storm surge sensor, but it's actually going to use high-resolution pressure sensors to measure the weight of the water around it, and then above that will be a cellular transmission unit up there. That's also going to be measuring atmospheric data above the water level, and that's what's going to transmit that storm surge data that also factors in the salinity of the water to determine the exact depth. It actually corrects the pressure measurement based on the salinity of the water just to reduce the error, and the salinity sensors have been well calibrated by Mark. He's been working basically 12 to 18 hours a day to get this ready in time, and sadly it looks like there is going to be another late season hurricane probably toward the end of this month that could develop in the Caribbean. The European model does not show that, but the Gfs and its ensembles is definitely hinting at a gyre down there that's going to be forming in the Western Caribbean. It could pump out at least one or two, maybe more tropical cyclones that could have impacts across the southeastern U.S. So before I show you the spectral data, I wanted to bring your attention to this series of pressure whipsaws that were in the downward trend of that eye. And as Mike was on a dock out on Lake Arthur, he was able to see one of those tornado-like vortices crossing Lake Arthur and heading toward our location. It then passed over the subsonic sensor that was located in the downtown portion of Lake Arthur, and that actually registered a pressure whipsaw that also showed up on the spectral data, and I'm going to show you that right here. Right, meow. But first, I wanted to show you some of those gravity waves that were evident on satellite imagery. And this shows a storm that's getting stretched out by southwesterly wind shear. It's interacting with a trough that's upstream. It's curving to the north and off to the northeast and accelerating at the same time. And the interaction between the upper trough off to the west, and look at this, almost a baroclinic leaf type of a situation, as this storm is getting stretched from southwest to northeast, encountering that southwesterly wind shear. And once the wind shear ramped up, that's when it began to develop these gravity waves. And you could definitely see them on satellite. This is infrared satellite imagery. And you can certainly see where the center was coming in down here in southern Louisiana, down near the Creole area. And all these gravity waves, even though you can't see them, go underneath these colder cloud tops as well, associated with the convection. And it's these gravity waves caused by the interaction of this tropical cyclone with the trough upstream that we were able to measure with the subsonic sensor. And you can see that this storm looked a lot different than that satellite image that I showed you when it was approaching the northern Yucatan. It was a more vertically stacked system, tropical cyclone that we'd be more accustomed to seeing in the tropics and the deep tropics. This tropical system is one that's trying to enter into the mid-latitudes, is encountering some southwesterly wind shear associated with those temperature gradients as it's transitioning from a purely barotropic to more of a baroclinic environment. And as that's happening, the disturbance that is a tropical cyclone creates these gravity waves, basically the heartbeat of a tropical cyclone that really tells you and helps you describe the characteristics inside this storm. And here's the spectral data from the subsonic sensor that was measured in Lake Arthur, Louisiana. This is the second intercept. And then I'm going to show you again the data that we collected inside the Cancun portion of this storm. This spectral data, when you compare this with the raw data measured with the subsonic sensor, gives you an idea of which of those vortices are actually coupled with the convection, those tornado-like vortices, and also which ones are just basically eddies, less coherent eddies caused by the wind flowing through the building. In this spectral data, you can see here in the beginning part, that's when we were placing the subsonic sensor, and then we placed it inside a sheltered location in downtown Lake Arthur. And this definitely stands out right here. This coherent frequency, this is showing broadband spectrum right there. And you can see here in the frequency diagram that this is a very coherent pressure whipsaw that exhibits broadband spectrum inside the spectral plot. You can see it covers a wide range of frequencies. And that tells us that this particular gravity wave or pressure whipsaw was actually a tornado-like vortex that was whipping around the northern eye wall in Lake Arthur. And we actually saw these visually with our own eyes as we were out there on that dock of Lake Arthur. You could really see those tornado-like vortices passing over the water surface. They were often associated with enhanced spray and also precipitation as they came in. Basically little miniature hot vortices releasing a bunch of latent heat. But you could definitely see them inside the spectral plot. And this right here is the eye, the calm of the eye that we mentioned. You can see how it's a lot less broadband spectrum exhibited here, but you can see that some of these gravity waves inside the eye also exhibited that broadband spectrum. That could be storm chasers having a meeting inside the eye. This right here are likely generators, maybe some vehicles that are sitting there humming as well, those narrow horizontal lines across a narrow frequency. But the sharp vertical lines are ones that are indicating broadband spectrum, and that means that those waves are a lot more coherent. This one likely being a tornado-like vortex in the northern eye wall that we actually observed with our own eyes. And you can see how this one stands out, even though when you do look at the raw data here of the subsonic, you can see that there's a lot of waves in there. But the most dramatic whipsaw exhibiting broadband spectrum within that spectral data, broadband frequency within that spectral data, covering a larger frequency range and a very instantaneous up and down, indicating that that's a wave that's traveling by the subsonic sensor. But really it was that circled area with the pressure coming down, and it seems like that after that tornado-like vortex passed, the overall pressure then stabilized for a little bit before dropping down to its minimum. And so it's possible that these tornado-like vortices in the northern eye wall are caused by the interaction of the hurricane with the friction of the earth as it's coming in to the northern Gulf Coast. It's also possible that there's some type of coupling action between the overall gravity waves caused by the interaction of this tropical cyclone with that approaching trough from the west and the enhanced convection inside the northern eye wall. But notice how it was still breezy as well inside the northern part of the eye. So just like we've observed in many of the eyes so far during this 2020 season, many of those eyes are called dirty eyes, where it's a little bit breezy inside and you don't have that perfect calm that we often see in some hurricanes. And a lot of times that breeziness is caused by gravity waves that may be propagating around inside the eye or other features. But definitely textbook subsonic data measured inside the perfectly calm second half of the eye, showing those gravity waves oscillating up and down. And here is the data that we collected inside Cancun. So as I mentioned, this was a different life cycle, a different phase of the life cycle of this hurricane. It was in more of a barotropic environment, more pure tropics down there as well. But it was noted that this was a hurricane that wasn't intensifying. That's different than a Hurricane Sally. And Hurricane Sally actually had much more dramatic pressure whipsaws in the front eye wall, or those tornado-like vortices that were passing by. We actually had dramatic pressure oscillations that led to pain inside the ears. Definitely had a physiological response. Another thing that we noticed inside the data in Cancun was this pressure wave that was right on the outside of the inner core of this compact hurricane. We weren't able to sample this pressure wave inside Hurricane Delta when it arrived in southern Louisiana, and that's because we deployed it after the inner core arrived. It was an expanding inner core, a larger system as it was interacting with the approaching trough. But one thing we also noticed was the lack of gravity waves in the very calm section preceding this storm. You just didn't have those larger scale gravity waves that we saw with Hurricane Delta as it was approaching southern Louisiana, and that's as it was interacting with that approaching upper trough, the accelerating southwest and northeast shear flowing by the basically obstruction that the tropical cyclone is acting as, embedded within that stronger southwest and northeast flow. That's capable of generating those longer wave, lower frequency oscillations that we observed inside the eye. One difference here, though, is that we did miss the center of the eye in the Cancun city center. We only measured a pressure minimum of about 985 millibars. We did drop south and went mobile in our rental car and went to the south side of the Cancun strip and measured a pressure that was lower, a little bit closer to that eye, but different than the data that we collected in southern Louisiana. We weren't able to sample those gravity waves inside the calm of the eye, but we did sample these pressure whipsaws one after another inside that eye, likely 4 or 5 tornado-like vortices inside there. We did not see that inside Hurricane Delta as it was approaching Louisiana. We did see one tornado-like vortex that went by, a couple of other whirls, but likely we saw this pressure wave too, but we didn't have the subsonic sensor recording in time to capture the transition from a quiet environment to inner core hurricane type conditions. And you can see that as these fine scale oscillations increase, that signifies a ramping up of the wind speeds inside this hurricane. This full spectrum deal that you can see here, that's just when we move the subsonic sensor from the trunk of the rental car to up into our motel in Cancun City Center. But definitely very different data sets collected at 2 different life cycles inside Hurricane Delta. And the plan long term is to have many of these subsonic sensors deployed in a network inside the hurricane. That way we can track those tornado-like vortices that are whipping by the subsonic sensor. But there you can see that pressure wave just on the outside of the inner core. Big time gravity wave action as well in the front eye wall. And this definitely shows data sets collected at 2 different life cycles inside the hurricane. And as I mentioned, the damage, absolutely devastating to see this firsthand. This drone footage was taken the morning after Hurricane Delta came in. This is near the Creole area. And that standing water there, that flood water, is left over from the storm surge of Delta down here that was about 6 to 8 feet in the Creole area. We saw some watermarks down at South Cameron High School, 2 different watermarks. We actually found a fish, a catfish, inside the gymnasium there that was brought in from Hurricane Delta. It was a relatively fresh fish, but you can see that a lot of the recovery is yet to happen down here in the Creole area. And that's incredibly sad because Hurricane Laura came through about a month and a half ago during August. And you can still see many structures completely annihilated out there by that powerful, powerful storm surge. This is a combination of what's left over from storm surge flooding and freshwater rain, freshwater runoff that was trying to flow down into the Gulf of Mexico. Many of the roads, including Highway 82, are impassable. After Hurricane Delta came through, the water, the road was washing away down there as well. So that definitely shows you why you don't want to be driving in these types of conditions. But it was almost like nature was reclaiming the land. You saw a bunch of alligators down there, frogs, snakes everywhere, random flocks of birds flying around as well. But it is incredibly sad to see that the recovery effort is definitely not well underway a month and a half. And then Hurricane Delta came in, causing more problems. There were some new power poles that were put up. Those were tilted. Many of those were knocked down by the Category 2 winds of Hurricane Delta that came in. They have a long road of recovery ahead down here in southern Louisiana and other locations in the north central Gulf Coast. And that's why we're selling Louisiana Strong t-shirts on the Team Dominator store. I'll be linking that as well in later posts and showcasing some of our new t-shirt designs. All proceeds go to the recovery effort and those reputable charity organizations with boots on the ground that are helping people out there. So we're going to continue pushing those t-shirts to try to help out in this recovery effort and continue to put eyes and attention on exactly how bad it is still down in southern Louisiana. Even a month and a half after the first hurricane, then another hurricane comes in. You also have damage further east with Hurricane Sally that was caused. And as I mentioned, we're not out of the woods yet. This is the Gfs Ensemble. This is from the incredible Tropical Tidbits website. This is about October 23rd. And notice this area of vorticity down here in the Western Caribbean. I'd be really surprised if this did not generate a tropical cyclone or a hurricane. Some of the models are showing northward movement over western Cuba, possibly interacting with the Florida Peninsula. Some of those models are showing more of a fish storm that could come in over portions of the Northeast. You definitely don't want to get bogged down with the individual tracks, just that it's likely that hurricane season is not over. You can see one of those storms pumping up northward from that main area of vorticity down in the Western Caribbean. This one could be a Hurricane Epsilon, Tropical Storm Epsilon, even approaching the Florida Peninsula around the October 24-25 time period. You can still see some leftover vorticity down there as well in the Western Caribbean that could generate additional tropical cyclones. And interestingly, the European does not have this pattern as robust of a pattern with this positive vorticity or a gyre developing down here in the Western Caribbean and pumping out these storms, some of which ride the Gulf Stream all the way up into the Northeast, even impacting parts of the northeastern U.S. And it looks like there could be a couple of other tropical cyclones that emanate from that. And they want to go out to sea, so the Bermuda High has shifted just a little bit to the east right now. So it wants to turn these storms off to the north and then out into the western Atlantic. And that's at least good news for the central Gulf Coast, southern Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, even the Texas coast, as these storms will have a likelihood to maybe even go off the eastern seaboard, although the models are showing a potential Florida impact and definitely something that could come out of that gyre. But it's getting later in the season. The jet stream is coming south. There's snow on the Continental Divide and the Colorado Rockies. There's been snow in the Canadian Rockies as well. So that jet stream is coming south, and we're getting closer and closer to the end of hurricane season here for the Atlantic. That goes into early November. And in fact, Hurricane Wilma happened around Halloween, I believe, back in 2005. So there definitely is the potential for very impactful tropical cyclones late in the season. And that is possible. It could happen in the southeastern U.S. around Florida. You never know if we're going to have another Sandy situation with a negatively tilted trough in the wave train there, pulling that tropical system back in. No indication that that'll happen, of course, in these long-range models. We just basically have to keep an eye on this, keep an eye on this pattern, see if the European jumps on board, but just realize that the Gulf of Mexico and the U.S. hurricane season here is likely not even close to over, as we're only at, mid-October now, and we still have quite a long ways to go. So that's what we're looking at with this system. That's the recap of Hurricane Delta with our science. We hope to have the Surgeonator ready to go for the next intercept. Mark is working on that hardcore. He's already sent me a couple of videos that show the Surgeonator in action, and it's working. He's calibrated the salinity side of things to measure the salinity inside these storms. And so our goal long term is to have a network of subsonic sensors to measure the pressure whipsaws and tornado-like vortices, a network of windy palms in the path of this to measure the wind speeds throughout the hurricane, and a network of Surgeonator sensors to measure the hydrological impacts of these hurricanes, so then we can get the trifecta of data, of scientific data, the storm surge measurement, the high resolution pressure data, gravity wave / infrasound data, and also the Surgeonator / the wind speed data measured from windy palms. That's probably going to be next year by this time. We're doing a lot of proof of concept stuff this year, but we are collecting valuable high resolution subsonic data, windy palms data inside these storms, measuring a wind gust of 156 miles an hour inside the western eye wall of Hurricane Laura near the Cameron area, actually closer to Holly Beach. So a lot of data to go over here, a lot of data to analyze. I'm going to keep doing these weather briefings, sharing the data, because the Team Dominator support community that I've linked in the text of this live stream have made all of this data possible. They've been along for this journey since the beginning, and we're going to continue to finish what we started and roll out all this scientific equipment. It's also going to be featured on our new show, Category 6 on National Geographic Channel. That's going to air in early 2021, maybe around February or March. So thank you everybody for joining me for this weather report and this live recap of Hurricane Delta. I hope that you guys have a great rest of your Tuesday, and I'm going to continue these live briefings as we move toward the end of hurricane season, and we're also going to be chasing winter storms. Still wondering if there's going to be a severe weather or tornado outbreak this fall season to keep an eye on. I have a feeling that Dixie Alley is going to wake up likely next month, maybe through the winter, despite the La Nina conditions that are developing in the tropical Pacific. But we've got a lot to talk about. I'm also going to launch my storm chasing school. That's going to be through the Facebook supporter community. One night a week, I'm going to do educational content, basically go over a whole meteorological curriculum, but try to help you guys become storm chasers out there, at least those that want to and have a passion for extreme weather and science that they want to take to the next level. Hopefully I can facilitate that and play just a small role in developing you guys as storm chasers and meteorologists. So thank you so much for joining me this morning. Again, I hope you have a great rest of your Tuesday. Never stop chasing.